Welcome to the Real Clear Politics Takeaway for Friday, January 7th. I'm Andrew Walworth. On Thursday, both President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris gave speeches in Statuary Hall to mark the first anniversary of the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol building. We'll talk about their rhetoric and what they offered as a solution: change the way Americans vote to shift more control toward the federal government and away from the states. And that's a tough sell in a narrowly divided Senate. So what happens next? Meanwhile, some public school teachers and parents are at odds over the return to in-person learning as the Omicron virus sweeps across the country. The CDC weighed in by relaxing its isolation and quarantine guidelines for schools, setting up what could be a bigger battle between Democratic politicians and the teachers' unions just in time for the 2022 midterms. Joining me to talk about all of this are Tom Bevin, co-founder and president of Real Clear Politics, Carl Cannon, Washington bureau chief, and Phil Wegmann, White House correspondent. Tom, let's start with President Biden's remarks in Statuary Hall. He went after Trump pretty hard without once mentioning him by name. Here's just part of what he said. He said, "The former president of the United States of America has created and spread a web of lies about the 2020 election. He has done so because he values power over principle, because he sees his own interests as more important than his country's interests, and because his bruised ego matters more to him than our democracy or our Constitution. He can't accept that he lost." Pretty tough rhetoric, but what do you think Biden was trying to do with his speech, and did it work?
Well, I don't know exactly what Biden was trying to do with the speech. I'm not sure what happened yesterday changed any minds. I think, if you're a Democrat, you think January 6th was a coup, an insurrection. It was, our democracy was hanging by a thread. If you're a Republican, you think that it was a riot, and it was, a protest that got out of control, a riot, whatever you want to call it. But that, the QAnon shaman guy was not in danger of taking over the government, overthrowing the government. So I'm not sure. Let's just be clear. It was an absolute orgy yesterday, media-wise. Live broadcasts from the Capitol, CNN, and candlelight vigils, and Lin-Manuel Miranda, singing. It was just insane in terms of the devotion of the media to this. Was it a significant event? Absolutely. Should it have been covered? Absolutely. But I think they probably overplayed their hand a little bit and maybe generate a little backlash. But again, at the end of the day, did a lot of people change their minds about what happened on January 6th because of yesterday? I doubt it.
Well, Carl, you've covered a few speeches by presidents and vice presidents, and I'm wondering about that rhetorical flourish of comparing this to both 9/11 and Pearl Harbor by Kamala Harris. And I should say that while Tom didn't like the speech, a lot of people did like the speech. There was a lot of commentary in the mainstream press saying this was Biden sort of coming out swinging, and this is sort of the Biden that we had hoped for. And one pundit said this was the speech that we were hoping he would make.
Well, hold on. And I didn't say I didn't like the speech. I just said I'm not sure what he was trying to accomplish with it, just to be fair.
Well, I think I know what he was trying to accomplish with it. I think what he's trying to do is lay the groundwork from switching to Build Back Better to this voting rights bill that the Democrats have named after John Lewis. You follow the thread. And in this sense, both Donald Trump and Joe Biden are on the same page, although they see the events differently. Trump orchestrated this riot because he thought the election had been stolen from him. The Democrats believe that this attempted coup, which is what they call it, is continuing. It's taking place in state capitals where Republicans are tightening voter ID laws, and they want to counter all that. And I think that's where he's going. So in that sense, there's a logic to it. As far as comparing what happened on January 6, 2021 to Pearl Harbor, it has less in common with Pearl Harbor than the sinking of the Titanic. It's such a bizarre and tortured historical analogy. I don't even know where to begin. I suppose the idea is that you wouldn't forget where you were when you saw it, but then you want to compare it to the Kennedy assassination. These politicians are better off without trying to reach for those kind of flourishes, I think. But Biden stuck to what he wanted to say. He wanted to say that Trump didn't accept the election because he's a deranged egomaniac, and we need to make sure that the elections going forward reflect the will of the people. So I think that's what he was doing, Tom. Yeah.
Well, I think you're right about that, but I tweeted this out earlier because it did strike me as a bit rich. Here's what Joe Biden said in his speech yesterday. He said, "Are we going to be a nation that lives not by the light of the truth, but under the shadow of lies? We cannot allow ourselves to be that kind of nation. The way forward is to recognize the truth and to live by it." Less than 2 minutes later, 4 paragraphs later in the transcript, he says, "Right now in state after state, new laws are being written, not to protect the vote, to deny it, not only to suppress the vote, but to subvert it. Not to strengthen or protect our democracy, but because the former president lost. Instead of looking at election results from 2020 and saying they need new ideas or better ideas to win more votes, the former president and his supporters have decided the only way for them to win is to suppress your vote and subvert our elections. It's wrong, it's undemocratic, and frankly, it's un-American." I'm sure Biden believes that, so it's not technically a lie, but I don't think that's how the majority of Americans feel about what's going on. So, he was decrying the big lie, and then he turns around and says that
let me get
effort for even anything.
Wait, Andy wants to bring Philip in. Come on.
I know.
Yeah,
I'm
You're filibustering.
Phil.
The filibuster has not been outlawed on this show, I noticed, Andy. We still have it.
We have a 3/4 vote to tell me to shut up.
So here's the thing. We're going to get to voting rights in a second, but I did want to ask Phil about something Jen Psaki said, because she got a lot of heat for this Kamala Harris remark. And she said, for those who are being critics of the vice president's remarks, instead of focusing on or analyzing comparisons of moments in history, I would suggest that they be part of solving the threats of democracy that occur today. They're using this as an excuse not to be part of that. Is this where the White House wanted to be?
It seemed like Jen Psaki was saying, don't take a closer look at what was just said. Don't dive too deeply into the argument that we're making. Just get on board and move along. Certainly, if you are inclined to believe what this White House is saying, then that's good enough. But a lot of Republicans aren't, and they want to dig into that comparison because it is a pretty eye-catching one. Kamala Harris knew exactly what she was doing. The vice president is the one who delivered that line, not the president himself. That was an opportunity for her to get headlines and to ingratiate herself with the base. And, to echo what Carl and Tom have said, I think that this is clearly an opportunity for the administration to turn the page and get on to their next initiative, which is voting rights. And I know we're going to talk about that in a moment, but I think more largely, the White House had been telegraphing that this was going to be a big speech for some time. And it was the least surprising surprise that at a moment when his poll numbers continue to plummet, that President Biden decided to go after Trump. He didn't just say, he's the former president. He said he's the defeated former president. And maybe in the end, this will turn out to be a mistake. Maybe this is the sort of thing that pokes Trump in the eye and makes him decide to return to the public square even more, similarly to Obama making fun of Trump at the White House Correspondents Association dinner in 2015. What we can say, certainly, is that the White House and Democrats generally, when they are in tough spots, they return to the well. And the well is blaming the former president, whether it's on an issue of policy, whether it's, a crisis that they're still confronting, or if it's an attempt to gin up their base. And in a lot of ways, this was brushing off the old foil of Donald Trump, returning to the playbook that helped him win in 2020.
I agree with that, Phil, but I think there's a potential problem with it. And I'd be curious what you guys think. So after Biden attacked him, Trump, you knew he would, he responded. And he said, he basically accused Biden of trying to distract the voters from his own shortcomings. He said, this is a quote from Donald Trump, Biden, who is destroying our nation with insane policies of open borders, corrupt elections, disastrous energy policies, unconstitutional mandates, and devastating school closures, used my name today to try and further divide America. Well, I don't think use it to further divide America. Use it to focus attention on, for these 81 million people who voted for Biden, say, remember, what this guy was like. And after seeing Trump's statement yesterday, I went back and watched the whole speech of Trump's January 6th speech. I didn't watch it at the time. It was so tiresome. I didn't realize it was going to cause a riot. But you look at that speech and it's just deeply irresponsible in so many ways. And he's encouraging people to not abide by an election. And he'd been doing it for months. And this is so Democrats want to focus on that. And Biden's and Trump's saying, well, they're trying to distract you. But I'm putting myself in the mind of an independent voter. I am an independent voter. And even if you believe everything that Biden said yesterday, you still might say, okay, pal. Yeah, I get that. That's why I voted for you. But what are you doing about inflation? And to me, this idea of distracting voters, I'm not sure it's that easy to distract voters is what I'm saying. What do you guys think?
Well, I think that clearly he was sort of returning to his greatest hits. Biden, in a lot of ways, thinks that half of his work is already over because his candidacy was one to save democracy, to defeat Donald Trump. Now Trump seems to be waiting in the wings. But the Trump response is really interesting because he seems to be banking on the fact that everyday average Americans don't see the Capitol in reverent terms like the average congressional staffer does. And so he's turning attention back to the military, inflation, all of these troubles. And I think that it's a bet. Biden is saying, again, democracy and our republic are at stake. And Trump is saying your everyday life might be at stake in terms of, how you fill up your gas tank, make your mortgage payments, so on and so forth.
Tom, what do you think?
Well, I agree. I think the Biden administration needs a bogeyman. I mean, having Trump front and center is good for them because they have a foil, they have someone they can point to. And without that, they are kind of left out there alone with the consequences of, whatever the issue is. We had just this very morning, just a really dismal jobs report, 199,000 jobs. I think it was supposed to be something like 400,000. And while the unemployment rate ticked down, we've got less people in the labor force. So he's not going to be able to distract voters, if that was the intent, from real world concerns for very long. But it was an opportunity, certainly, for the administration to highlight, what happened last year, the importance in their mind. But I also think every time Biden has had a chance, every time, to back up his campaign rhetoric of being a president for everybody, uniting the country, moving us along, he chooses the opposite. He did it with COVID with battling red state governors, the vaccine mandates, and he's doing it again here. I mean, he could have taken, and again, I get that, everybody on the left thought this was a great speech. Finally, this was the day he became president, and Jen Rubin and Matt Lewis, thought this was such a great speech. The media loved it, and folks in his party loved it, but it certainly didn't unite the country. It certainly didn't offer any sort of fig leaf to Donald Trump supporters. And it did, in fact, the opposite, I think. And so in that sense, it may have been good for him short term to give his base a little shot of enthusiasm. But I'm not sure it's going to help him win any votes or move the needle on any of these other issues that continue to confound the administration from COVID to inflation to, go on down the list.
Yeah, it does seem to me that there was a disconnection in that both the president and the vice president gave these two sort of bookend speeches at the Capitol, using this high-minded rhetoric about January 6th being an existential threat to democracy. And then the solution they offer isn't some sort of call to our better angels, but rather it's just an old-fashioned push for their legislation agenda. And this pivot from Build Back Better, which is certainly stalled in the Senate, to their voting rights bill, which seems to be equally stalled, might appear to some just to be inauthentic. But let's talk about these voting rights bills, because that is, according to the administration, the solution that's going to keep us from having any more January 6th. There are two voting rights bills. They would give the federal government more power over elections, but they're not going anywhere in the Senate, Phil, without some sort of change in the rules. So again, I mean, I know this is a pivot, but it doesn't look like it's a cakewalk. Are they pivoting from one thing that they couldn't get through the Senate to another, Or is the real agenda here, hey, we've got to get rid of this filibuster rule?
I think it's a little bit of both because it's a different issue set, but the same story, in that just like 2021 was the year of Joe Manchin being a burr in the side of Joe Biden, we're going to see the same thing. If Chuck Schumer and company thought that by switching to voting rights legislation, they could finally go on the offensive and really take Republicans to task for being obstructionists, well, they're completely wrong, because so far what we've seen from Manchin and Sinema is that they are opposed to any changes to the filibuster to get this thing to the finish line. What that means is that rather than needling Republicans, Schumer and company are going to be having another drawn out fight with members of their own party. I haven't seen anything to show that Manchin's resolve has lessened.
You mean the Oprah phone call did not sway him?
I'm not sure if the Oprah phone call persuaded him, as reported by Politico, but certainly the pressure play, all the carrots and sticks that the administration could throw at Manchin to get him on board with spending more money, that didn't work. And so I'm genuinely kind of expecting a lot more of the same. I mean, different arguments, but same obstruction.
So, Carl, it does seem to me that you have these two holdout Democrats, Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, and they're arguing against this change in the filibuster rule, not because they necessarily oppose all of the substance of the voting rights bills that Schumer wants to pass, but because they understand that changing the filibuster rule would give an advantage to whichever party is in the majority. And with the midterms now just 10 months away, this could come back and bite the Democrats pretty hard in very short order. It seems a pretty logical argument.
Andy, it's not only logical, it's been proven. The out party, Mitch McConnell warned Harry Reid, you'll regret this. And then, then it turns around. You have two people out of 100 whose sense of history goes back more than 24 months. That's the calculation. In terms of the merits of the bill, though, it's easy to dismiss what the Democrats are saying. Conservatives say, listen, you need an ID to, get on a plane. You need an ID to take Amtrak. You need an ID to buy something on Amazon. You need an ID to get into a hospital. Do anything, basically anything in American society. Why don't you need an ID to vote? And they're not wrong in saying that. But these people, these veterans of the civil rights movement who are still around, remember, to them, this voter ID it's reminiscent of the poll tax, of these questions that were asked of Black voters in the South to deny them the right to vote. And there's a history there of voter suppression not by the Republican Party, by the Democratic Party. But there are African Americans of a generation who see any barriers to vote as something aimed at them by the political establishment. And while voter ID is nothing, these people, the poll tax was just a ruse. You just couldn't vote if you were Black in the Deep South. That's not true anywhere. And the vestiges of this Voting Rights Act that still has these states and districts in question where the Justice Department has given permission to change anything, it would be time. It's time for a fresh start and to look at what the voting requirements in this country ought to be. And I've said this, and I'm going to keep saying it. In a functional democracy, the two political parties would get together and liberals would say, listen, this legacy of voting suppression is no joke to us. It's very serious in our minds. And we're going to be adamantly opposed to any rules that prevent a class of people from voting, even if that's not the intent. That's just the result. And the Republicans are going to say, okay, but voting integrity matters to us. And we remember there are elections that have been stolen from us in Cook County and other places. And we don't want dead people voting. We don't want illegal. We don't want people who aren't citizens voting. We don't want people voting 3 times. And in a functional democracy, the two political parties could work out procedures that would ensure both of those: maximum voting participation and minimum fraud. And I just don't see, the rhetoric that's coming out, and in this case, from the President of the United States, comparing Georgia's law that actually expanded voting rights to Jim Crow 2.0 is not helpful. It's not leadership. It's not what he promised to do. It's not healthy. It's not even intellectually honest. But both parties would have to come to the table and agree to try and fix the problem. And the problem is half the country doesn't accept an outcome of an election they lose. That is an existential problem for democracy. It needs to be fixed. The Democrats should quit playing games, and the Republicans should quit defending Donald Trump. I'm going to get off my soapbox now.
Tom?
It's just the idea that, showing an ID to vote, we have to show IDs to do all sorts of things. And suddenly now this is a vestige of racism. I mean, Democrats are the ones who want people to, we have to show our vax papers now to get to go sit down to eat. So it just strikes me as, and part of what Republicans are concerned about is there were a lot of changes made to make exceptions for and for the pandemic, right? And they want those rolled back. We have, drop boxes and ballot harvesting and all of these different things. And those are things that Republicans are concerned about. But Democrats, because the window has sort of shifted because of the pandemic, now anything that has to do with election integrity, from just showing an ID at a polling place to any of these other things that have been added to the mix, is suddenly seen as Republicans are trying to disenfranchise voters. And so the parties are on two completely, not even just separate pages, separate universes when it comes to this issue. That's why we can't get any compromise, any rational compromise out of our elected leaders. And so, and it's going to continue. There is going to be no compromise on this, and it is going to be an issue in 2022 and 2024 because Democrats have now basically done the same as Donald Trump, already ceding the ground that the election in 2024 is not going to be legitimate or valid unless they win. If they don't win, it's because Republicans suppressed the votes and they did all these things. 2024 is going to be a no-win situation because it's particularly if it's Donald Trump versus Joe Biden again. I mean, that's the nightmare scenario. So I think this is we're not going to get there won't be any legislation. And by the way, if there is some miracle where Kyrsten Sinema decides, I'm going to go along with this, which she has not given any indication. She's been very consistent over time that she's not for it. But even if they did, the legal challenges on this thing would be immediate and intense.
It would require the Supreme Court to get involved. It's a constitutional issue.
Absolutely. It would go straight to the Supreme Court. And I would be shocked if they upheld it because it's almost explicitly in the Constitution that states have, this is the state's domain to regulate their own elections. So I don't think there's going to be legislation. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I think we're in for a train wreck of an election in 2024 because both sides are actively, in this case, I think Democrats are doing it more actively than Republicans in terms of ceding the ground that the next election is going to be illegitimate. And Biden just said so yesterday.
So, Phil, there is one piece of election reform that could pass. It's this idea of reforming what's called the Electoral Count Act of 1887. Basically, it would clear up the confusion over how the vice president certifies election results from individual states. Presumably, it would put an end to the kind of end-run approach that Trump tried to take in 2020. Phil, is there any possibility that something like that gets through, something that's got some bipartisan support right now, even if it doesn't have support from the Senate leader himself?
The legislation that you just outlined doesn't seem to have a path in Congress right now. What Tom said seems to be true, but even more extreme in that I'm not certain what presidential election moving forward, unless it's a uncontested blowout, would either side not claim that there was some wrongdoing or malfeasance. And on top of all of that, I'm not certain that you even have any elder statesmen on the Republican side who could come in and have a bipartisan moment. So I think that we are perhaps tiptoeing around Armageddon in that there doesn't seem to be any appetite for compromise, and there doesn't seem to be anyone willing to even have a conversation that the grassroots would accept. Mitch McConnell can come out and say, well, hey, maybe we make this change, maybe we make that change. well, that's not going to satisfy any of the progressive folks who say that any Republican reform is racist. And also, it's not going to satisfy any of the conservative grassroots who are demanding pretty significant changes to state election law at the moment. So I don't see how this gets solved. And I think that, surprise, surprise, self-interested politicians are going to make the most of a divided moment.
Carl, let's talk about these teachers for a second then. I don't know. This is not a happy podcast today. I don't know.
Hey, these two, are you kidding me? Tom and Phil make Eeyore look like Roosevelt. Don't include me in that with them.
Well, at any rate, we seem to have a brewing standoff between the teachers' unions and maybe even the White House over these school closures. We had the CDC come out with new guidelines that sort of lessen the quarantine period for schools. How bad is this politically for the White House? Or do you think they can handle it? Or is this sort of a Reagan moment for him where he could stand up to the teachers' unions?
Well, Reagan moment. I mean, in that and these crazy analogies. I mean, in that analogy, the Chicago Teachers Union is the Soviet Union. I'm sorry, I don't buy it. I forget. John Cass had a great...
No. They're the air traffic controllers, Carl. PATCO.
Air traffic controllers.
I was trying to be funny. I'm sorry. I guess humor seems to have left American politics some years ago. Although today I got a very funny press release from LULAC, the United Latin American Citizens League elected officials, and they took off on the dictator in Korea for claiming he invented the burrito. And I thought we need more humor. But anyway, all right. Yeah, Reagan got rid of PATCO. Joe Biden cannot get rid of the Chicago teachers unions, guys. Look, and here's the problem. Now, John Cass sent a column. One of you sent me a column it was Tom or Andy, by John Cass, the great Chicago columnist. I think he may have used that Reagan analogy, but Cass's column is brilliant, and in there is some chilling and just poignant facts. And one of them is this. According to his column, and he cites the link, I have no reason to doubt it, many more Chicago school children have been killed by gunfire in the past 2 years than have died from COVID. And what John is saying there is that this is not just it's not just a labor dispute. This is a matter of safety. These children in the Chicago public schools are falling behind. The people who need the instruction the most are falling the furthest behind. They're being told they can't go to school. The streets are not safe for them. That is a crisis for the city of Chicago. And Mary Lori Lightfoot, who is very progressive, is now, she's just had it with the union there. And, Tom lives there. I don't know what the solution is, but keeping kids home from school is not safe for them. It's not safe for the kids. I don't know that this is Joe Biden's problem to fix, but it's a Democratic Party problem. It is, Andy. The teachers unions, are so powerful in Democratic politics that these Democratic office holders either have to stand up to them or give in to demands that are proving unreasonable.
Well, Tom, you're out there in Chicago.
I am. Is
Mayor Lightfoot about to have her Reagan moment?
Well, she, like previous mayors before her, she got rolled by the teachers union last year, and now she's trying to stand up to him. But once you've been rolled, it makes it that much harder to stand up. Now she's talking about suspending teacher pay or something like that, but. And saying, look, this was an illegal action that was taken unilaterally on behalf of the teachers union, when even the CEO of Chicago Public Schools said that, and offered a compromise. I mean, they want kids in school. She wants kids in school. Administration has expressed their frustration with it. They want kids in school. The consensus now is that for a whole host of reasons, educationally, emotionally, physically, all of that stuff, that kids are better off in schools, that we have damaged kids by locking them out of schools for the better part of a year and a half. And we recognize, even folks at the New York Times, David Leonhardt earlier this week said, I didn't realize how bad it was until I started reading some of the data on it. And it's bad. I mean, we've really hurt kids. And we knew, it's one of the only things that we kind of knew from the beginning of this pandemic that has held throughout the entire thing, is that kids are less susceptible to it. right? They don't get the virus. And if they do get it, it's a very mild case. It is not dangerous to them. But nevertheless, teachers have, and look, I've got 5 kids. We've had a lot of kids in school. There are some great teachers. I don't want to disparage all teachers. I'm really more expressing my personal frustration with the teachers' unions, because they have acted as if they are somehow a protected class, while grocery store clerks and truck drivers and folks all around this country in the midst of the pandemic, when we didn't know a lot about the virus, when we thought, and certainly it was dangerous, those folks didn't get a pass. They had to go and do their jobs, and they did, and kept this country working. And somehow the teachers decided that they didn't want to get sick, and they needed all these precautions. They needed all these extra. And by the way, so we passed a bill and we sent billions and billions of dollars to school systems around the country. And the Chicago Teachers Union now is saying, well, we don't have enough testing, and we don't have this and we don't have that. It's like, well, what did you do with all the money? Where did it all go? What protocols were put in place to make sure that if we did have a third wave or a fourth wave or a next variant, that you could continue to operate? So on a bunch of levels, it's very, very frustrating. And but I'm not sure how much can be done about it, in terms of, unless and until the parents just absolutely lose their minds and go crazy at the teachers, and or something is done where, as John Cash mentioned, could school choice be an option? Are there things that can be done to allow parents to move their kids to places where they can get in-person education when a district or a union decides that they're just not going to play ball?
Well, not to put too fine a point on it, Tom, but one thing, this is an election year, and I'm wondering if Democrats are going to pay for the teachers unions flexing their muscles, pay for it at the ballot box. I mean, we talk about John Cass, he's a conservative populist columnist, but Angie Schmidt, writing in The Atlantic,
which we have on the front page today,
describes herself as a liberal who not only gave money to Democrats, always voted Democrats, protested against Trump, had trouble speaking with family members who didn't agree with her about Trump. She has a column in the headline that speaks for itself. COVID school policies made me sour on the Democratic Party. That's not very ambiguous. If this is widespread, it seems to me that later this year, voters who feel that will have a chance to express that dissatisfaction.
So, Phil, are they worried about this at the White House? Because, one thing we did learn in 2021 in Virginia was that, you don't want to poke those parents too hard, because they do vote, and they vote in large numbers, and they have long censorious memories. What are the Democrats going to do here? I mean, they're stuck between parents and teachers, or at least teachers' unions.
They know what happened in Virginia. They saw that Youngkin outperformed, not by too terribly much, but he certainly outperformed his competition in districts where schools were slow to reopen. This is just, another accelerant for what they see as a potentially really rough midterm election. And I go back to one of the first press conferences that Jen Psaki held. I forget who the reporter was, but the reporter asked, and this is after we had the vaccine, and this is also after, as Tom noted, we knew, and this is documented in several scientific studies, that not only are children not as at risk of getting the virus, they're also not as likely to spread the virus. But a reporter asked, if it comes down to it, to a binary choice, who will Joe Biden choose, the kids or the teachers? And Jen Psaki sort of hemmed and hawed and complained about the premise, but she said then in February of last year that, of course he wants the schools to be open. Now, there's been a lot of drama about this, but it's come to a head now where you've got an overwhelming majority of adults in this country fully vaccinated. We understand the virus much better than we did back in 2020. It's also a less dangerous variant than we had. And the Biden administration, they don't want to have this fight. They don't want to necessarily have a Reagan moment where Biden is opposed to the teachers unions because, he would have to, have some uncomfortable conversations in his own family. I mean, the First Lady herself is a member of the NEA. And so the Biden administration, though, they are very much coming out on the side of the kids. They're saying we want the schools open, and they're putting this as politely as they can because they don't want to anger teachers unions, but at the same time they know that there are a lot more parents than there are members of the ATF or the NEA, and they're saying we want schools to be open. And this was brought to a head when Jeffrey Zients, the head of the COVID response team, he notes we've spent $140 billion in the American Rescue Plan to get schools ready. We spent another $10 billion to make certain that testing was available just for schools. And oh, by the way, we let teachers and school staff cut to the very front of the line when it comes to vaccinations. What's the holdup? And I was reminded once on this podcast that I am childless and have no children, and that I shouldn't be talking about reopening schools. But
we'll give you a pass this week.
Chicago is the nation's third largest school district. They are playing with fire if they don't eventually tell the teachers unions to get in gear, because parents are saying, I went to the office, I made sacrifices, it's time for you to do the same. And it's not as critical or dangerous as it was just 2 years ago.
Well, I think that's a good indication of how serious this is when lifelong bachelor Phil Wegmann is concerned about public schools for their for the kids he doesn't have.
Let's not say lifelong. There's still hope.
Okay.
Let's not give Phil such a hard time just because the three of us have 16 children and grandchildren between us, and Phil still hasn't gotten figured out how to get married yet. Let's give him a break. Andy, I thought Phil put it well, but we got this election coming up. There are more parents than there are teachers, but it's the bigger picture here is that we're still in this 2 years in, we're still struggling with how to respond to COVID. It's dividing the country. We haven't got it. We haven't figured out, is this virus just endemic? We're gonna have to live with it, or are we still trying to kill it? Some city councilwoman in Detroit said last week, we're just trying to flatten the curve. And I thought, oh my God.
I haven't heard that in a while. Yeah.
Yeah. I never heard that phrase before 2 years ago. I hope I never hear it again. The Biden administration is struggling with this, and that doesn't mean that they're doing something wrong. It's a very difficult time in our country's history dealing with COVID. And I don't think we want to demonize the teachers unions or even the leadership of the Chicago Teachers Union. What you have, what their stance reflects is fear of getting this virus and being hospitalized or dying. It's a real fear because it's a real virus. So, the big picture is the Biden administration has to get a handle on this, and they need some luck as well as some help. Tom's shaking his head no. Did you see that? It's on the radio, and Tom's shaking his head no. Is that even allowed?
There are two points I'd make. Number one, Omicron, thankfully, right, from what we know, is more transmissible but less severe, right? So we have to start. We can't continue to live in fear. We just cannot, as a country, continue to live in fear and not do things that, as you mentioned in a different conversation, Carl, we did learn that teachers are essential workers, actually, right? They need to be in the classroom because of the damage that's done to the kids if they're not. They are essential workers in this economy. So we need them at work. And the other point I would make is this is the problem, the political problem for the Biden administration when you run your entire campaign based on trying to say the federal government's going to control the virus. We're going to come in there and shut down the virus, not shut down the country, not shut down the economy. And it doesn't really work like that. It worked as a campaign tactic, but as a governing tactic, they've been, I think, they have not done what they promised to do. They've underdelivered on their promise, and they're paying a political price for that.
Well, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank Tom Bevin, Carl Cannon, Phil Wegmann. We're usually here Tuesdays and Thursdays and Fridays in some form or fashion. So bookmark this podcast, check back often. As ever, I encourage you to go to Real Clear Politics and read one article from a writer or publication with whom you disagree. If January 6th and its aftermath teach us anything, it's that we have to keep up a dialogue across parties, ideologies, and at least in my home, across the dinner table. I've got 3 daughters home from college, so we have a lot of interesting political discussions going on. Hope that's happening in your household as well. Thank you for listening. For Real Clear Politics, I'm Andrew Walworth.